I've seen a few weird things for which I have no explanation, but rationally, now there is one. Like some astronomical event outside my knowledge or some sort of transitional sleep state I was unaware of in the moment. The one thing I've never been able to explain to myself is how my peripheral vision tricked me into seeing my little brother get up and walk away, when he never moved, because I wasn't the only one who saw it. When we were kids, my best friend, brother, and I were camped out in the backyard watching the stars, each of us snug into our own sleeping bag. My friend was in the middle. While we were talking, I saw a shadowy shape off from the opposite side of my friend stand up and move toward the house. It was quite dark and all this looked all completely normal. Just my brother going to the house to use the bathroom without saying anything to interrupt my friend and me. A few minutes go by and my friend and I begin a new subject. My brother hasn't yet returned from the house, but suddenly chimes in from his place on the other side of my friend and we both shriek. We start demanding to know when he snuck back, and he's adamant that he never moved. My brother was pretty young at this time, borderline too honest, and not prone to pranks. He really hadn't moved, and he hadn't snuck back without our notice. I still don't know exactly what we saw get up and leave. If I'd seen this by myself, I'd assume I was partially asleep and imagining things. There were no dogs or any pets in the yard with us. I had an imaginary friend when I was a kid, who I can still see vividly in my mind. He felt like a big brother or older cousin. His name was Hugh. I remember the day he wasn't there anymore. I was 4. I hauled and screamed for hours. I felt like I was dying. About 16 years later, I went to my aunt's house to babysit my 4-year-old cousin. She was an extremely calm child. I never saw her upset. I walked in the front door and it was like the World War III. She was red-faced, screeching at the top of her lungs and bawling her eyes out to the point that my aunt was considering calling in sick to work to mind her. I asked my aunt what was wrong and she said her imaginary friend disappeared. Eventually, she calmed down and my aunt went to work. My cousin told me about her imaginary friend who was her big brother, called Hug. She told me what he was like, and he was exactly like my own imaginary friend. A few years later, another aunt was doing research on her family tree and found out that at age 16, my grandmother's uncle walked out the front door to go to work and was never seen again. He doted on his little sister, and she was never the same again when he disappeared. She was 4. His name was Hugh. Nobody ever found out what happened to him. I never knew this story as a child, and neither did my cousin. I like to think that we reminded Hugh of his little sister in some way, and he wanted to look out for us like a big brother. When our oldest was maybe 18 months old, he looked my wife straight in the eyes while she was giving him a bath and said, "Reincarnation." There are 2 very weird stories tied to it. He talked and could actually read at a very young age. He had an invisible friend named Wilson Wilde that helped colored people travel on the trains. We always assumed that this was some Underground Railroad reference, and for the record, we'd never uttered the phrase colored people. He also claimed Wilson had a baby that slept in his chest of drawers, something that was pretty common in the 1800s. And where did he get chests of drawers from? By far the weirdest was when he was probably 3 or 4. We were going to the wedding of one of my wife's dear friend's daughter out of town. She was marrying a Vietnamese guy named Hung. We took our son with us and my mother-in-law came down to watch him. He had never met Hung before, but the entire car ride up and day or so leading up to the wedding, all he could talk about was seeing Hung. When do I get to see Hung? Where is Hung? Why isn't Hung here? We went to the wedding and reception. our son didn't go. And the next morning, Sunday, they had a breakfast. Our son was playing in the lobby of the hotel when all of a sudden he freezes, turns and bolts straight out of the hotel lobby into the portico and out into the parking lot, running full speed. We chased after him, only to catch him as Rachel and Hung were walking through the parking lot. There stood our son, and he pointed straight at Hung and said, "Hung, it's me." Hung looked around like, what the fuck is happening? And who the hell is this kid that knows my name? We still laugh about it to this day, and oddly enough, Hung and our son, who is now a freshman in college, actually text one another with some regularity. It's like they were old friends from a past lifetime. When I was around 7 years old, I slept over at my granny's house. My granny is Hungarian. In the wee hours of the morning, I woke up and looked to the side of the bed where there was a long console table. On top of the table was an old woman dressed in very old-fashioned clothing. She spoke to me in Hungarian. Mind you, I did not and still do not speak the language. She said to me that someone wants to come through, as in come into the physical world and be born, and asked if I would birth this person. I agreed, but she said that they wanted to come soon. Basically, when I was quite young. I deliberated with her for a bit, having a back and forth exchange with her on how 15 was too young for me to have a child, and I need to finish school first. After a bit of back and forth, she said 17, and I agreed. She also mentioned that I will only have another child much later in life. She then went on to tell me that life is going to be very hard, but it will get easier. The strange thing is that I didn't feel 7 years old at the time. It's almost like I wasn't trapped by age, if that makes any sense. She then said to go back to sleep. I still remembered it clearly the next day and told my mother. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't me dreaming that I woke up. I very distinctly remember myself waking up and being afraid at first, seeing someone there. Strange part is that many years later, at 17, I found myself pregnant. I only just finished high school by the skin of my teeth. I am now in my 30s, and I've been through a lot of hardship that most people my age haven't gone through yet. My life has been so rough that I've had to get onto long-term medication and therapy to deal with things that have happened to me. As a weird extra, I don't know if this has any bearings, as I'm sure there are a lot of people out there with the same thing, but my son's palm lines on both hands form a very distinctive leaf star on each palm. I've also not gotten pregnant again, yet. However, on 2 separate occasions many years apart, I have had a self-proclaimed psychic and a sangoma tell me, both times without payment, and both said they were told to tell me that I will have another son much later in life. It's a bit spooky. The last weird thing was that a few years ago, my grandmother's last brother died, leaving her as the last one alive of her siblings. She was sent an old photo album that had belonged to him. Inside was a picture of my grandmother's grandmother. Super old picture that I'd never seen before, as it is the one and only photo of her. Lo and behold, it is the woman who spoke to me all those years ago. Freaked me the fuck out. I don't have any explanations for this. I worked for a costume studio working on TV shows. I was working weird hours, seriously deprived, and a lot of stuff was going on in my life. I was working really long days with only like 4 to 5 hours between shifts. I had a pair of prop glasses upstairs in the studio. In the basement was the actual workshop. I gave the prop glasses to an assistant while upstairs and didn't want to see them again ever. After a shit that went like 20 hours, and I fell into bed at 5 a.m. At 6 a.m., I got a call from my co-worker asking if I had seen the glasses. Except I didn't fully wake up during the call. Being so sleep deprived, I answered it while mostly asleep. When my co-worker asked about the glasses, on her end, She heard me say, "Wait a second, I'll go check," and then was silent for like a minute. Then came back and gave her very specific instructions to find the glasses, which she followed and found them in the workshop under a roll of leather. From my standpoint, I somehow jumped to the studio without my body. I was physically looking around but couldn't touch anything. I saw the glasses under the leather, zapped back to my body, told my coworker, and went back to sleep. When I woke up, I thought the whole thing was a dream. Later that day, my coworker comes up to me and says, "Thanks for finding the glasses for me. I got them to set on time. Sorry I called you right after you fell asleep and woke you up." To this day, I can't wrap my head around it. I never saw the glasses again, and I wasn't in the workshop that day. I couldn't have had some sort of subconscious repressed memory of their location. So I guess I actually projected on accident? I guess that's real? I guess. When I was 13, I remember wanting the LG Marquee, the Android phone that cost $280 at the time. Of course, I did not have the money, and my parents said no for being too expensive. So what did I do? I tried stealing money. Yes, I know, I was a stupid teen. So I decided to try and steal money from one of my basement tenants. The tenant was not home at that time. I wrapped my shoes with plastic to prevent mud tracks from my shoe print, put on an oversized jacket, and I went around the house to open his window. It was open. I gently went inside to not break anything. While I was inside, I looked around to see where he would keep the cash. I didn't find anything. I remember hearing my uncle's then girlfriend's voice in the basement. She was home, and my dad's 7-year-old brother was in her room. I locked his window and then quickly bolted upstairs. Fast forward to sunset, the tenant complained to my mom that she was robbed of $300. The window that I opened was shattered. His mirror was also shattered, and muddy footprints were found in his room. I was nervous, but then I remember I didn't steal anything other than going inside his room. The footprints were bigger than my feet, and we later found out that 6 other houses in my neighborhood were also burglarized. My uncle's ex-girlfriend said she didn't hear anything when she was downstairs. The mystery is, who robbed my house? Was I being watched from a distance and the burglar followed me shortly afterwards? When did the burglar go inside the room after I left? How did he go inside undetected when he broke the window downstairs after I locked it? To this day, I always wondered, what if I was seconds away from encountering a stranger in my house? The police never found out who did it, and the case is still unsolved to this day. I never attempted to do anything like that ever again, and that was 12 years ago.